Viewpoints on the talk station FM 107 AM 1240. As I picked up the phone, our guest Vince Coglainese, formerly of the talk station and the Carter County News Times, asked a question. What are we talking about? And I said, well, we can talk about the vice president, that is Joe Biden, and how is that percolating there? That story associated with Hands Joe. Apparently, that was a comment, I think, from Nancy Pelosi. Needs to keep his hands to himself, something of that nature. How's that working in Washington, D.C. with the hashtag #MeToo movement? And then we got into the other topics, of course, the 3 Mexican countries and Beto O'Rourke with his native Spanish. So we'll get into those topics as well here in just a moment. First, Vince, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. And what's it like in Washington, D.C.?
It's just as crazy as ever. I mean, honestly, actually, right now it feels like things are a little bit slow because normally everything is hurtling a million miles an hour. It's hurtling just under 900,000 miles an hour right now. So we've just slowed just a little bit. I think everyone's kind of waiting for the smaller report to finally drop. We're told mid-April, right? So we should see it sometime, maybe a week and a half from now. When we'll see the redacted Mueller report, and that's when I expect a lot of things are going to kick into overdrive again.
All right, that will kick into overdrive, but we have so many other issues that are circling as well. Let's talk about the issue of Joe Biden. How is that working its way through Washington, D.C.? And by the way, Senator Joe Biden, formerly Vice President Joe Biden, apparently is a really nice guy, and people like him, but is there a sense of discomfort in D.C., or is this something we just recognize? And of course, he's looking for all sorts of scapegoats. I shouldn't say scapegoats, causes for this. He's challenged the far right. Now he's challenging Bernie Sanders as being the culprit in all of this. But really, how much of this has any value?
This is one of the most Washington, D.C. stories you can get, actually,
Really?
In a bunch of ways. Yeah, and the reason for that is because of the just sort of gross hypocrisy of this story. So let me set aside what you think of Joe Biden's creepy behavior for a second and just ask a really simple question. Were you aware prior to this week that Joe Biden could be creepy around women?
And personally, yes, I knew that. And by the way, there are, and I'm pretty confident on this, there are Secret Service personnel, particularly ladies, who are not comfortable were not comfortable when he was, of course, vice president, of having the duty, because I understand that he is very prone to liking to swim in the swimming pool au naturel.
Yes, that's right. It's one of the reports that he would like to swim without clothing on in front of his female Secret Service agents.
Exactly.
Okay, so in other words, this is not a closed secret. It's not one that was simply even limited to just inside the Beltway. Like everybody knew, Joe Biden is creepy with women. It's so obvious that he's that way that he does this on camera. I mean, this kind of conveys kind of how he thinks about it. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with it, that he's kind of nuzzling women's necks and seemingly smelling their hair, getting too close to them, clearly violating their personal space. As you see sort of video of woman after woman pulling away from him in these public spaces, kind of inching away from the old guy as he keeps kind of digging in there. Look, it's not a secret. There's a reason, though, Washington has decided now of all times is the time to begin scrutinizing him for it. And it's because he's a threat to other Democrats' power.
Okay.
So the only reason anybody's playing this game right now is because Joe Biden is considering jumping into a presidential race. Now, you'd normally say, well, Vince, that's normal. I mean, you litigate things about the person ahead of a presidential race. Now, this guy was at the pinnacle of power. He was the vice president of the United States. There was plenty of time to litigate whether or not he should have access to power on this basis and whether or not what he was doing was inappropriate. And here we are watching as this is becoming an issue nationally, as people are making accusations against him on the record. It emanates from the fact that he's running against a bunch of different people: Beto O'Rourke, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg. I mean, just go down the list of all these people he's running against. Any one of their campaign teams could either be pushing people to go public with these allegations or even pushing other reporters to spend more time focusing on the allegations because they're looking to take out an opponent. And we've seen this before. We saw this when Al Franken got in trouble. So he was accused of sexual harassment. There are photos of him hanging his hands over a woman's chest in a picture. He says he was doing it in a jokey way. There was never any time to actually litigate that issue. He was thrown out of the Senate by his fellow Democrats instantly. Why was that? Because they needed a pretext to take down Roy Moore in Alabama. They thought that if they left Al Franken around, it would hurt their ability to hurt Roy Moore's chances of winning in that Senate race. It was about political expedience. It's about a double standard that only exists because they're trying to advance the interests of Democrats.
Vince Coglainese with us this afternoon, and again, executive editor, I should have mentioned that at the outset, of the Daily Caller, and also the co-host of Mornings on the Mall, WMAL. All right, we've teased the question. I'm going to come back to this right after this break because I want to chat about all the misinformation that's coming out of Washington, D.C., what's the cause of this? And, of course, we have the famous story with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who made note of the fact that the 21st Amendment was passed because...
The
22nd Amendment, thank you very much, was passed because of Senator, I apologize, of for FDR. Well, that has been proven wrong, and of course, Liz Cheney takes her to task on this. The amount of misinformation that's coming from Washington, D.C., what's the source? Of course, we've got the 3 Mexican countries as well, and, of course, Beto O'Rourke's native Spanish. Stay with us here on Viewpoints with Vince Coglainese of the Daily Caller and WMAL, Mornings on the Mall in Washington, D.C. Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107, AM 1240. All right, we had a quick break there. We've got Vince Coglainese of the Daily Caller with us this afternoon, and, of course, also joining us from his offices. Are you in your office now in Washington, or are you on your way home as we speak to you, Vince?
No, I have the good fortune of being home this afternoon.
Okay, good.
I was able to cut out early.
Outstanding, just so you could be on this program. Thank you very much. All right, Vince, the question goes to the topics of news that's emanating from Washington, D.C., and I think the first story on the top of my mind here, and I'm kind of curious as to, let's go through these issues and then talk about what is the cause of this. And, of course, Fox News, was it Saturday morning, I think, they noted the president was going to initiate basically a restriction on 3 Mexican countries, and I'm assuming it's El Salvador, Guatemala, and Nicaragua.
Honduras.
Oh, Honduras, okay. 3 Mexican countries?
Yeah. This is all predicated on that this is a mistake, obviously. This is some producer whose responsibility it is to fill out what's known as the lower third of the chyron on cable news and made the mistake of writing 3 Mexican countries. I don't know the person. I have no idea who even was responsible for it, et cetera, et cetera. It's just somebody made a mistake. It's not attributable to the hosts that are sitting on the TV screen or anybody else, but somebody clearly made a mistake there.
All right.
And I'm sure they got a talking to, but everyone went crazy. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning or something on Fox. I don't know how long it was up for, but typically those types of things are only up for like a matter of seconds.
30 seconds.
But it was long, and it was long enough for Fox's critics to spend the entire weekend attacking Fox.
Okay, now let's talk about this in relationship to, of course, we've got the president, that is Obama, making note of, was it 56 or 57 countries that make up the United States? I'm never sure of that number. There's that experience. Then we've got the topic, of course, I mentioned it briefly, Beto O'Rourke, and was it AP who said that Beto O'Rourke was speaking in his native Spanish?
Yes, the Irish Robert Francis O'Rourke was speaking in his native Spanish. That makes a lot of sense. I think it was Ted Cruz who tweeted that maybe they meant his native Gaelic, that they've gotten it wrong. But it is a weird mistake, actually, because anybody who's paying attention for like half a second, if you're covering Beto O'Rourke's campaign, you would not make that mistake, I would think. But that suggests a very shallow knowledge of who the candidate is. He's not Spanish, and he's not native Spanish. Although he grew up in South Texas, he's Robert Francis O'Rourke. It's just bizarre.
All right, and then as I mentioned a few moments ago, Liz Cheney and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez get into a Twitter spat. By the way, that's identified on the Daily Caller. Go to dailycaller.com to see this story. And there are other aspects of AOC's observations related to just international and national issues, and it's stunning. First, the information is accepted as valid and accurate. Then it's on top of that. They've defended her remarks, and I'm just wondering. Let's talk about this. She of course makes note of the fact that the 22nd Amendment was passed by Republicans because of fear for the FDR having the opportunity to yet again run for office. Of course, limiting it now to 2 terms rather than unlimited terms. And of course, he died long before the 22nd Amendment was passed. But again, all of this is accepted as factual. Vince, let's talk about this. Why is this the case in Washington, D.C., where one would expect only the prime reporters, the very best, would be covering this market in light of the dynamics, the speed of which news is happening, which we'll get to in a moment. What's going on in Washington?
Because too many of them are insular, shallow, incredulous defenders of the Democratic Party. And that's the sad truth. It's like they don't want to spend a lot of time nitpicking the fact that people like Alexandria Cortes, who truly has become one of the most public faces, if not the most public face of the Democratic Party. They don't want to spend time nitpicking her. They don't think that's worth it. They don't want to be, they don't want their friends or their colleagues in the industry upset at them for even spending any time fact-checking her, things like that. This, while they have like live counters of how many sins or lies the President of the United States has told today, we constantly see things like that. Now, granted, there's a vast disparity in their actual power. The President deserves scrutiny, and I don't think he deserves the partisan attack dogs that he's gotten, but he deserves scrutiny no matter who he is. But sort of the giving people like Ocasio-Cortez a pass is part of what she actually accidentally tapped into, which is she explained a little bit earlier this year when people were saying, "Hey, you're so factually wrong about so many things." She kind of hand-waved it as like, it's not really about being factually right. It's about whether or not you're morally correct.
Right.
She said. And that is kind of, first of all, that's scary, and it means that she's basically engaging in the same assessment that the people in the media are engaging in, which is the kind of assess on a case-by-case basis. Am I with this person morally? Because if I am, I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time picking on whether or not they got it right. If the world's not going to end in 12 years, we're not going to let's not focus on beating her up over that. The truth is we care about global warming. So if we criticize her at all, we may undermine that. You know what I mean? It's like they pick sides based on their politics, and far too many people are just like kind of young and shallow too. That's the other side of it. They don't know any better, and they look around them and they try and impress their bosses, their peers, and their sources.
Let's talk about that in relationship to age here in a moment. Vince Coglainese of the Daily Caller with us this afternoon, and of course also just to remind you, the co-host of Mornings on the Mall, WMAL in Washington D.C. from 5 to 9. Am I correct on the time?
Every morning, 5 to 9 a.m.
Okay, so what's a little sleep? It's not that important. All right, Vince.
Very important. Get some sleep.
The issue here, of course, goes to the President of the United States, and we've seen for many years the whole concept of fact-checking, and of course the President himself, quite frankly, is very bombastic. I'm using that term. He just goes off and uses all sorts of phrases, descriptions that obviously the media there in Washington, D.C. and around the country have taken great glee in fact-checking every aspect of it. Now, the fact that the President has been, pretty aggressive about this, is that in reality if you will, the media's decision to simply say, okay, if the President's going to do it, we'll just let everybody do it, and we're not going to challenge anyone. Yet they still do their fact-checking on every comment, particularly every conservative comment, yet they don't do the fact-checking on the Democrats and the liberal program. I'm wondering, is this a matter of, if you will, the media has, and granted they've shared with us their bias, but at the same time, have they sort of given up?
I mean, I heard a couple things, and I want to cite they attribute two of them to Chris Plant, who's a colleague of mine at my radio station.
Uh-huh.
He says of Democrats that were not for double standards, they'd have no standards at all.
Right.
He coined that phrase. And I think that's basically true. By the way, that's throughout politics. That's so many people are like that politically, regardless of party, but it is especially true for Democrats, I think. The other is, as you're looking at the media, it's unfortunate to say this, but they've the idea that it's simply predicated on bias is what again Chris says to me. It's a quaint notion. It's kind of like an old-fashioned thing to be like, the media is kind of biased. It's not. It's outright corrupt. I mean, it is outright over the top corrupt in the interests of serving the ruling class and trying to basically reject anything that flies in its face. So Donald Trump, they don't like him.
Okay.
They don't like him. They want him out of office. That explains the last 2.5 years of coverage about Russia and collusion and all sorts of nonsense that was never going to lead anywhere.
All right. Very quickly, about 45 seconds ago, Vince Coglainese with us, the Daily Caller. Is this also a matter that we have young reporters in Washington, D.C., and they're looking for just to satisfy their bosses?
Yes, that absolutely plays a role, and their friends, and think about it this way: when you read stories, and you're like, "Gosh, who was that written for?" Because I feel like I'm not the audience for this. Like somebody else must be the audience for this piece, because it's not written in any way to satisfy the types of things that I'm interested in. It's because they're writing for their peers, they're writing for their friends, and I often say that the last couple of years of the administration have proven that our country is being led many times by a deep state and a shallow media. And that's not a good thing. That's a bad combination. Vince
Coglainese of the Daily Caller with us this afternoon here on Viewpoints. And, of course, we've heard him many times before as he was here as a host of a program, what was it called? It was U-Talk. Well, University Talk. Well, it was the precursor of the Y Factor. Stay with me. I'll chat with you briefly off air, Vince. But, as always, thank you for being with us this evening.
My pleasure.
Vince Coglainese, again, dailycaller.com, or if you want, you can also go online and listen to Vince in the morning, WMAL, Mornings on the Mall in Washington, D.C. You're listening to Viewpoints on the talk station, FM 107 AM 1240. Coming up in a few moments, we're going to talk about the issue of Chick-fil-A and the fact that they're being denied access in several airports, not just one. Stay with us here on Viewpoints.